everyone. We're so excited to welcome you to Let's Unpack That, a brand new podcast where we're making space for nuanced, authentic conversations about real life questions that ultimately empower you to live out your faith.
I'm Alex.
And I'm Grace.
And we're a married couple in our 20s and 30s. The seeds of inspiration for this have actually been years in the making, from our daily walks together outside and leading small group here in our home. And we just kept realizing more and more how hungry people are to go deeper and to get more clarity on how to truly follow Jesus with their lives, not just to say they believe him with their words.
And we're just two regular people also trying to figure it all out about how to live our lives through God's lens. And we want to invite you into these conversations that we're having in hopes that they can inspire and help you too.
Our heart is to create authentic conversations with practical tools that encourage, empower, and equip you to live out your faith every day, wherever you go.
Regardless of where you come from, we're so glad that you're here, and we can't wait to get even deeper and share more with you in the coming weeks. So make sure to set a reminder on your calendar to tune in every Monday starting next week as we start unpacking how we can truly live the ways and the lives that God calls us into.
It's going to be great.
Yes, can't wait. See you next week.
See you next week.
Everyone, welcome back to the How to Podcast series. I have two smiling faces looking at me on the screen as we're chatting. Grace and Alex is with me today from the Let's Unpack That podcast. I'm so excited because I'm listening to the show and enjoying a couple sharing their heart, growing community, and living life with intentionality. I love it. So welcome, Grace. Welcome, Alex. Welcome to the How to Podcast series.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave, for having us.
Yes. Love to be here.
Amazing. Okay, so tell everybody where you are in this big world first before we get going.
Yeah, we're a married couple. We live in the San Francisco Bay Area, near San Jose, for anyone who's familiar with that. So we've lived here for around 5 years now, but we come from different places. Well, actually, Grace comes from the Bay Area.
I'm from here. Alex is...
I'm from, then let's just round it to LA, the nearest major city. So Southern California.
Excellent. So, okay, how did the two of you meet?
That is a fun story. We'll give a short version. If anyone's interested, it's probably, I think we have a longer version on YouTube in our channel. But we met actually on a Facebook group, unintentionally. So I was living in Australia, in Sydney, Australia at the time. I was working there. Alex was in Orange County, where he is from. We met in this Facebook group following this YouTuber that we both watched, which is it's not like a dating like community or anything. It's just like inspiring videos. I think we both like share similar values with that YouTuber. So we were in this group. He commented on my post because we all make like one welcome post, and I only posted like once or twice ever in that group. And Alex commented, and we kind of went back and forth. I sussed out his Facebook profile and was like,
She stalked me.
He seems like a decent guy, very, very sweet guy, but I think we would never meet. So this won't go anywhere. But then he slid into my DMs, and the rest is history. And now we're married almost 3 years.
Well,
I skipped a bit.
You skipped a lot. Some other pertinent details is I was living in Southern California. She was living in Australia. But I was deciding whether I should even pursue her because I don't know if this relationship will ever work. We're in total opposite sides of the world. It's literally almost about 20 hours time difference. This is hard to do. But my mentor at the time, or mentor friend, just encouraged me and said, "Hey, Alex, if you're really serious about this woman, you better pursue her like a man." And I said, "Oh, okay, I better do this." And so I bought a ticket, round trip ticket to fly from LA to Sydney, Australia to meet her for the first time, to make sure that she's legit. She's not like AI generated or anything. And turns out she's a real human. And I did not get catfished or anything like that. So we just made it official in Sydney, Australia. Then we kind of knew earlier on that we wanted to be married to one another, but didn't really know how to make sense of logistics. Long story short, we decided to move in the Bay Area. I moved first, and then Grace followed suit, and then got plugged into our church community there. And we got married in December of 2020 in the height of COVID, which was interesting. So we've been married for 3 years, and it's been a wild journey.
Nice. Well, congratulations, guys. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yes,
So good.
thank you.
So good. So yeah, 3 years for me. I actually have my anniversary tomorrow, the time of recording. It'll be 30 years.
Wow.
Married.
You got a little bit more than us. 3x.
Wow.
1x.
So I have 10x you there, I guess, right?
Yes.
Wow.
So there you go. So
Happy anniversary.
You have a great path. Thank you. You have a great path ahead of you, and having somebody by your side is the best way to do life, I think.
Yeah.
To have that confidant, to have that person with you. Yeah. And I can tell you guys kind of even like each other. So that's really good.
That helps.
Yeah, that helps a lot.
It helps. Okay, so talk about the podcast. How did all this start?
Yeah, wow. Okay, these are all great, juicy questions that I'm like, every question could be a separate episode. But pretty much, so it's interesting, right? Like, I think all of us have these little, like, what ifs, like, what if I could do this? Or that would be so cool to do this. And I kind of had this vision for something like this podcast, but I didn't know what it was, like, many years ago. So I had several instances in the past. I remember one specific instance in 2018, but then also many other instances where I would be like drawing, doing some kind of exercise, reflection activity or whatever, when people would be like, oh, in your ideal world, what would you be doing if you didn't care about the money, right? And so I always had this like desire to share like personal life lessons, inspire other people with them, and also help people kind of fulfill more of the potential that, they're meant for. Because I just saw so many people, this would like constantly burden me, where people felt stuck or people felt confused, or they were just like, I just have to settle for this. But I always was a big believer, like, no, you're meant for more. Like, there's more inside of you, and don't just settle for what you think you're confined to, And so that was always inside of me, but I didn't know what it would look like. And then when me and Alex met, it's so interesting. Our very first conversation that we ever had on video.
Late 2018.
Yes, which was such an interesting first virtual date. Both of us were like really awkward and nervous, but it was cute in hindsight. But yeah, we basically we got to the topic of like, what is your vision for your life? Like, what do you care about? What do you want to do? And it just really struck me as so interesting that what he said basically put into words that desire that I had, which was, you said something along the lines of, I don't know if you remember, but it was like also like using your life experiences to like inspire people through like whatever content, like social media or blogging or writing or whatever. And he said it more articulately, but I basically was like, oh, interesting. I have the exact same vision. And it like related to our faith. And I was like, I've never met anyone else, especially a guy who like cares about this kind of stuff like this. So fast forward, anyway, this year I was kind of like prompted again to like dream again, reflect again. I also stepped out of my full-time job last December, which was very scary because I didn't have any backup plan. But I, again, just felt this like knowing that I was supposed to step out and like start dreaming again about what I'm really meant to do in this next phase. And like all the puzzle pieces basically connected. It was kind of like a mystery, you're solving a mystery with all these clues. And then I had just this revelation, like, we need to start a podcast. Like, it would actually be kind of ridiculous if we didn't, because we have the same vision. We like doing this stuff. We wouldn't see ourselves as like, media personalities, but I really felt like it was something that we're meant to just pursue and grow in and learn how to do. I knew it would be hard. And I also wasn't sure if Alex would be on board. But I just pitched it to him and he was down to do it. And now we're here. So.
What's the podcast called? And Who do we serve?
Yes, it's called thank you for it's called Let's Unpack That with Alex and Grace. And we're all about just empowering people to live fully and freely and faithfully, whatever that looks like in your life. And we talk a lot about like emotional health, mental health, spiritual health, and relationships, work, money, like all of it. So yeah. I was gonna ask Alex to share his side. Like when I approached you with the podcast idea, how was like, can you talk about your processing with that? Because I think you were a bit hesitant at first, like, oh, I don't know, I don't speak often, like on platforms or whatnot.
I mean, for me, I'm pretty risk averse. So, and starting a podcast has never really crossed my mind so much. Like, I don't even listen to podcasts all that much until this year.
Yeah. You watched a lot of YouTube.
Yeah. YouTube is my my vice, I guess. But yeah, Grace seemed really passionate about it. It seemed like she really found her calling. And as a husband, why would I hinder that? And then I reflected on my life too. And I've had like dreams and things I've journaled down that are related to more like using my voice to share my lessons, learn, inspire, and encourage other people as well. So I felt like I wouldn't say it's an answer to my prayers, but it was more of a confirmation, I would say. And so we just decided to do it. And yeah, Grace has been faithfully leading the charge on it. And then not too long ago, we also launched I have a coaching business where we coach people in emotional and mental health to help them find more healing and wholeness in their lives, whether it's anxiety or shame or comparison, you name it, whatever you're going through, we help you through that.
The stuff we talk about on our podcast.
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So it all connected.
Nice.
And yeah, we were just taking it one step at a time and seeing where it led.
So do you think either one of you would have a podcast on your own if the other person wasn't part of this?
Well, I did consider it at first. Like that was definitely, I toyed around with it because I was like, it's definitely easier in my head. I was like, it's going to be easier if I just do it. I don't have to like wrangle a schedule. I don't have to like, it's more work, right? When you involve more people. So I was thinking I could just do this on my own, but it's just that when I was thinking more and more about it, I was like, I really feel like we're meant to do it together, especially because there aren't many for us. You know, we're Asian Americans. I'm in my late 20s, he's early 30s. I just don't see many couples doing this stuff together and many examples of like, you know, living by faith, living fully, talking about mental health, like together. And so, and I know like whenever we have conversations, like we do like, you know, daily talks about all of this. So I was like, we always have such great, rich conversations with each other that wouldn't happen if it's just like me and my own little bubble. And so I felt like people would need to hear like both perspectives of like a guy's perspective or what Alex can bring and then what I could bring uniquely and then us together like bouncing off. So yeah, I think that was like a big factor to like why I was like, I'm gonna try to see how he feels. I'm not gonna force him to do it if he doesn't want to, but I felt like it made sense that people needed this like, or not, maybe not needed, but I felt like it would really inspire other people to see like a relationship of a married couple who we can talk about these things very openly and be like on the same page about it. Because I don't know, there's a lot of I think disillusionment around marriage and relationships, especially in this generation. And yeah, I know that for me personally, when I watched YouTubers or heard other podcasts hosted by couples, as a single person back then, it gave me a lot of hope and vision for what was possible for my future. So that was kind of part of it too. But I wouldn't, even if Alex got busy right now, I feel like we would just lessen the cadence, but still do it together. Like, I don't think it would be like my own thing.
Yeah. And I don't think I would ever do it alone. I'm more of a counselor / coach. I like listening to people and helping them individually. I think Grace definitely brings out the extrovert in me.
Great. So what have you guys learned about yourselves as individuals and yourselves as a couple by having a podcast together? How are you different now than you were before you had a show?
Oh yeah, so many things.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that, but I will say that there's not a lot of podcasters in general, or yeah, in general. And I feel like what I've noticed is that it can be a lonely journey in entrepreneurship in general as you're starting anything, whether it's podcast coaching or something else. So I honestly learned to just encourage myself and surround myself with people who encourage us.
Yeah.
Because it is at sometimes in just this journey, it's some thoughts creep in and they say, "What are you doing?" Or am I crazy? And
or they don't say that explicitly, but you can see it in their face, like they're confused.
yeah, which makes me confused too. So when you're surrounded with all those types of people, it just doubt creeps in, and so you have to fight against that and really reassure yourself, either by yourself or with other people. And faith is also important to us, and just being just believing for God to work through us as well. I've also learned that my wife is a great podcaster in terms of organizing things and creating content that just resonates with people's hearts. So
Aww.
That's something I learned about her.
Thank you. Well, I was going to say, I feel like you've also grown a lot in your confidence. Like if anyone goes back to our first few podcast episodes, we were like nervous. We were like, we want to get this right. But I feel like you've gotten a lot more comfortable in your own skin. And I don't know. Would you say that's true? I feel like that's.
I mean, I've never talked in front of a microphone before, unless it's the spelling bee or I don't know, making some sort of announcements. But yeah, I mean, this is completely different. What I do enjoy about podcasting, though, is many people are afraid of public speaking. But even though you are speaking publicly, technically, it's really not like public speaking. And I don't like public speaking. But because we're just having a living room style conversation, it's like, okay, we'll just talk about whatever, edit some things out, and then release it to the world. People don't have to judge us or critique us in real time. They can just listen, and it's more. Yeah, we don't. It doesn't really open the door for people to like react, and we see their reaction.
Right,
which helps.
Even if they do, I think the other thing about it is like, the beauty of podcasting really is people will choose to listen to your podcast. They're not forced. Like sometimes you go to an event and you're like, oh man, like the speaker's here, but I don't really want to listen to them, but I paid for this, so I have to show up. But like podcasting is like, you choose what you want to listen to. So already you have that affinity towards the podcaster. So as the podcast host, you don't have to worry about, I have to win this person over. Like they've already chosen to give you their time. Like you've already won half the battle. And so, yeah, I feel like that is a big part of what I've personally realized about podcasting is like, oh, wow, I can just like be my real self. And in the process of trying to be that way, learn more about who I really am too. It's like process of really, I know it's cliche, but it's like finding your voice. Like, what do you really care about? What is your style? Like these things rarely do we know up front before we start a podcast. It's like actually as we're podcasting in the journey, we realize more and more as we do it. And so I would say the second thing is similar to what Alex said in the beginning of people give you like blank stares sometimes when you're like, oh yeah, I'm like doing a podcast, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, what's a podcast? Or like, oh, interesting. How does that make money? And you're, there's a lot of conceptions depending on where you live and your culture, of course. But here in the Bay Area, most people work at a steady tech job. So when you tell them you have a podcast, they're kind of like, oh, okay, cool, good for you.
How does this work practically?
Yeah, how does
this pay my my mortgage?
Yeah.
Right.
So I feel like, similar to what I just said about the podcasting journey of like you kind of grow as you go. I feel like the podcasting journey has grown my skin, like thickened my skin a lot, because I used to be so terrified. Like, what are people going to think? They're going to judge me. Like, if I say the wrong thing, will people like hate on me? And now I I could just be a lot more confident in saying, this is what I do. And I love it. And it gives me a lot of purpose. I know that people are being impacted and have helped. And I don't have to worry. I feel like I'm a lot better now in terms of not being so worried about what are people thinking or judging, or even if they criticize. So what? Like I love doing this, and I can see that it's meaningful. So
nice. I like it. So take us behind the scenes of recording an episode of your podcast. How do you go from idea to recording? Who does what? How do you divide and conquer? You have a lot of tasks to do. Kind of break it down for us to give us some ideas for the listeners who are thinking about podcasting with a co-host, maybe their partner. How do you divide up the work and who does what?
Yeah. Well, I think everyone's different because it just depends really on your unique strengths, right? Like for us, I know for a fact, like my strengths in my background has been in like marketing, communications, content creation. So I just never did it like full time for myself. I did it for other people. So going into the podcast world, I like knew, okay, I can come up with these ideas, but I want Alex's weigh in and input because Alex has really good thoughts and perspectives. So that's kind of how we operate when it comes to the ideation stage. I come up with ideas. I'm like, oh, these are some potential topics I was thinking. What do you think? Do you have other ideas too? Sometimes we let people vote on our social media. Like, what do you guys want to hear? And then we just discuss based on the votes. But since Alex actually has a full-time job outside of all this, he has a lot less time, and he does his coaching business as well, one-on-one coaching. He has a lot less time than I do to invest in the podcasting stuff. So yeah, we basically agree on the topics. I help flesh out like a very broad outline of like some talking points we could share and some insights. And then he reviews all of it and gives his input and edits. And then we just record it. We basically set up we actually don't even have, people think like you need all this fancy equipment. We just use our phone to record the video. And for the mics, I don't know if people can see, but we're using USB mics from Amazon, like literally like not fancy at all. And yeah, we just recorded that way. I used to edit by myself, but it took up more of my time. And so we actually just found an editor on Fiverr. There's like places like Fiverr, Upwork with freelancers who do this for a pretty decent rate. And so we work with him, just tell him, hey, here are our files. Could you, edit this out, cut this out, or whatnot. And he does all of it. And pretty much, yeah, once we get the final file, we just upload it onto Buzzsprout, which is our host, and it distributes it to all the platforms, and then upload on YouTube as well. So that's kind of like the overall high level view. But I think a lot of people think, oh, I need to have like a $1,000 microphone with a fancy studio and lighting and stuff. But we've personally we heard about this, and then we personally experienced ourselves in this journey that people listen not because you have the fanciest podcast, but because they like you, like they want to hear from you. So you are the most valuable asset. You bring your unique perspectives. No one else has your unique perspectives, experiences, thoughts, lessons, and also the way that you can deliver it. So in that sense, it's like, I think I used to be like, oh, but everyone else is already talking about this stuff. But like the same people who will listen to you won't want to listen to those other people in the same way. So.
Well, anything to add to that, Alex?
No, I think Grace is pretty thorough.
I know about this stuff a lot, so yeah. But I'm curious, what about you, Dave? Can you share some stuff that you've learned in your experience? Because I still don't know how you run so many podcasts.
Does your wife? What does your wife think?
She every time I get an idea for a new show, she's like, no, that's it. No, you have 7. That's enough. We do some podcasts together as well, and I love it. One thing I learned really early as a podcaster is I learned how to listen to people, and mostly out of the desire to not have to edit myself afterwards when I have to do all the editing, because I do my own editing. So I would notice that when my guest is talking, I would be, yeah, okay, yeah, me too. Oh yeah, good. And I would be talking with them. And when you edit, it just sounds terrible. So I just learned to be quiet. So I don't know if you notice while you guys are talking, I'm just listening. Because when I go to edit, it's less work for me and it's less distracting because
Yeah.
one thing I did early on that I stopped doing was my guests would start going down a path where they're going to talk about something and it's very meaningful to them. And I would inadvertently ask them a question that took them off the path and they never went back to the path again because I took them somewhere else, but they had a point. But because I misdirected them away from their main point, we, myself as a host and them as a guest, forgot to go back to the main point.
Right.
And my listeners are like, Dave, I really wanted to hear how Alex got to that big idea that he came to.
Right.
Because you never let him
Yeah.
finish because you misdirected him to somewhere different. And meanwhile, we're all waiting for the end of the story and we never got there. So
Right.
Wow.
I just decided to slow down, back off. And sometimes it's awkward because my guest is like, are you even listening? Like, you're not even interacting with me. And I get the looks on camera like, is Dave frozen? No, he's there. Okay. But I just want to let my guests talk. And then when they're done, it gives me a chance to go, okay, I want to go deeper on that. I want to know more about that. So my listening skills have improved and that benefits my relationships, even with my wife. So when she's talking, I'm not talking over her. I'm not misdirecting her from her points. She gets to talk and gets to complete her thought before I jump in and have a conversation with her. So it's actually had an impact on me personally. Back to my question to you earlier, Alex, like how has podcasting helped you and changed you? That's how it's changed me. I'm a better listener just by having a podcast.
Right.
Wow.
Good.
I think we're the opposite, Dave. I am a better speaker because of this podcast. Like,
good.
I think the challenging part for me is when people say something like blah 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 blah. Grace has this gift where she will say something back to contribute to the conversation which is great. I'm more of I'm an internal processor. I take things, I take a lot of time to process what they're saying just because it takes me a while to marinate on things, but I've learned to speak and contribute to conversations.
Yeah. Without feeling like it needs to be perfectly formulated for you to say it out loud. I think, are you comfortable sharing how have you seen that maybe even show up in work? Because I know that was something that you struggle with in work, your day job, like, in meetings of like speaking up or giving even like critical feedback, your managers or both of us have that had that feedback given to us when we were working before, like, oh, you need to give more not controversial, but like, don't be afraid to like push back. But then I would always be like, I just agree with like what you're saying. But I feel like podcasting has taught me personally, like how to think more critically of like, oh, interesting point. That makes me think of, another thing. And what do you think about that? And just thinking from more different points of view. But
yeah, I would agree. It's definitely taught me conversational critical thinking. Because you don't want to say something that is so generic, but you also people care about opinions, whether they're, I don't know, whether they agree with them or not. People just gravitate towards like the extremes for whatever reason. They don't want to be like in the middle. So it's helped me build the courage to speak my mind, say my opinion. Again, the beauty of podcasting is you just say it and hey, here you go. You can listen to it if you choose, but if you don't like it, then don't listen. Just pause. So it's definitely helped in my work as well, where there's a lot of critical thinking and collaboration involved. And so when people are bouncing off ideas, it's helped me exercise the muscle of contributing something meaningfully.
Nice. I know, like my wife works in a warehouse setting. She's a supervisor. When she first got the job, she was working there part-time and worked her way up the ladder. She was quiet in the background all the time. But when she's put into leadership, she would have to stand in front of her peers and lead meetings. And at the beginning, she was just like, I don't even want any piece of that. I don't want to, I'm not a out front person. I'm more in the background. That's where I like to be. But she was forced into that spotlight. And having a podcast and being co-hosting with me together doing this, she gained a lot of confidence. And her boss pulled her aside after podcasting for a while, and said, there's something different about you. What you used to be really timid and quiet in group settings, and now you're up in front of lots and lots of people with confidence. You're projecting, you're well articulating your thoughts. Like, what's different? And she's like, well, I'm on a podcast and I speak to 40, 50 countries a week. Oh, okay. Well, then that makes sense. You're doing something that not normally everybody in the building does, because most people say, what's a podcast? So you're exercising a new muscle that many people wouldn't by not having a show or not putting yourself out there. So that's I like seeing that result.
Yeah, I can totally relate. I think that also even makes me think of, I mean, you talked about like public speaking and how I personally, it's interesting because I feel like I've actually done quite a bit of public speaking before, and it became, the more you do it, the less scary it is. But I was actually even more afraid of podcasting in the sense of it's vulnerable. Like when you sit down and talk about things to, like, you're basically imagining being at a table with like one person listening, right? And like they'll actually know more of who you are versus I personally, for me on stage, it's kind of easier to mask myself. Like, this is my personality that I just want to display on a stage, and it's almost like a performance in a way for me. So like, and especially because I grew up going, like, I did ballet, I did a lot of like performing arts, so I knew how to like turn it on and like fake it till I make it, basically. But then when it came to our podcast and doing it, I was like, I don't want this to be a performance. I want this to be like genuinely me, because I want people to hear what's genuinely like from my heart. But that also means I need to be really comfortable being vulnerable and not putting on this like mask, basically. So it's risky because you put yourself out there. You don't know how it'll be received. It's not as like flashy with like all the lights and sound and microphone and like big stage. That's a lot of the times when you give presentations, it can feel that way. But I think for me personally, I was the opposite of your wife in that sense of like, I could do the fake confidence on stage, but when it came to confidence in a small room conversation, I didn't know how to be comfortable with myself. I didn't know how to accept myself, my true self. But this journey has really taught me like self-acceptance and loving who I really am and embracing all of it. And so, yeah.
I love it. Okay. So let's go back to early days. You're thinking about having a podcast. You haven't hit record yet. You haven't done anything yet. The show's not even named, but you come across this episode of a podcast and you hear, like you said, you heard couples on podcasts. You hear this couple, Alex and Grace, are here and they're talking about their show, and you're listening to this going, I think I'd like to try this, but I don't know where to start. I want to do this with my partner. We both agree this might be a great idea. We have zero idea how to create a podcast, how to do this. It's the name of my show is How to Podcast. So if you could speak to yourselves early days with all the things you know now, and let's talk to the audience now. And I would love to throw, it's your podcast now, some teaching, some instruction. What do we need to know? How do we do this? What things would you recommend? Even what things would you might not recommend as a starting point for your podcast as a couple? You're in charge now. You're teaching. I'm here to listen. What would you say to you early days that would help you start your podcast?
Great question.
Well, that's a big question. We actually did a training like a month ago on how to podcast. So we actually have a whole slide deck together. So I'll try to summarize it as best as I can. But the few nuggets, I would say number one is, besides the logistics and all that stuff, I would say number one is, who do you want to talk to? So identify your target in business, your target customer, what's your niche, and understand how they're feeling, what are they struggling with, what are their goals, what are their desires. So really just understand that. So for our podcast, we have our own like target persona that we're talking to. So whenever we're recording, we are pretending like we're talking to this person who has XYZ struggles, ABC goals. This is what their life looks like. This is how much money they make. This is where they live, all that stuff. So decide that. And just like, who are you called to serve, or who are you called to educate or teach? So that I would say that's like the number one thing.
And I think something that helps lead you to that, because oftentimes it's like, oh, there's so many people I could serve, is like thinking about what are situations where you feel almost like frustrated, like this isn't right. Like I want to do something about it, right? Like Dave, that your story of how this podcast came about is a perfect example of wanting to help people who want to start a podcast because you weren't seeing enough support out there encouraging people. And I feel like that inner knowing of like, this propels me and compels me to do it, helps you to continue serving those people because you understand their pain and you understand the frustration that is occurring, right? So I feel like oftentimes people are like, I don't know, like if I should serve this person or this person. And I mean, there's no wrong answer, but it's just about like following where's your holy, we call it like holy discontent. Like where is your discontent pointing to? And that could be a signal. Yeah.
Yeah. I would also say besides that, there's so many things, but I think that something that's helped in our journey is having someone who is a great project manager.
AKA
me.
You.
Yeah. Like leading up to the launch of our podcast, I was definitely helping out with the project management piece of it. Yeah. And I think that helped, right?
Oh, it helped tremendously because it's so easy to be so overwhelmed with all the things you need to do. So yeah, I was overwhelmed. I told Alex, oh my gosh, I don't know where to start. And then he helped like organize the tasks.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into a podcast, not to discourage you, but it's not as simple as hit record, although you can do that. But to launch effectively, we had to decide on a name, our target persona, what's our cadence, what's our brand logo, how do we want to launch this, all the things, right? And so, yeah, I just put all of that in a project plan to help us keep on track and be very thorough in how we're launching and even beyond that as well.
Yeah.
So I would say those are like the two things for me among many other things, but what would you say?
Yeah, no, those are great. I'm glad you gave yourself the credit you deserve. Because I think kind of tied to the persona thing and like the target audience thing, which helps so much. Like that's definitely, some people are like, oh, I don't want to go too narrow because I want to talk to more people, which I totally get. But the more narrow you get, the more you as a podcast host can visualize that person when you're recording any episode. And it just makes it so much more relational. You really connect with that listener rather than ambiguously talking to like somebody that you don't know anything about.
It's kind of like here in the US, I know you're from Canada or you're in Canada. Yeah. It's like there's Whole Foods and then there's Trader Joe's and then there's Walmart. Sprouts is another one, Costco. But they all serve basically the same thing, groceries, but they serve different customers. Whole Foods, trendy, more upper class. And then there's Walmart. It's kind of the opposite of that. But they all meet certain needs and criteria.
And then the specific people they're reaching when they go to those stores, they're like, yes, this is my place, right? So that's how you create like loyalty in your following and basically find the people that will want to follow you. And if you don't have that specific niche down target, you don't know. It's like you're trying to spray too widely and then you don't hit anybody, you know. But the other thing I would say related to that is knowing your purpose, like your why. Because if you don't have like a clear enough why and purpose that compels you, like that is emotionally tied to your values, beliefs, how you feel like people need to be helped, it's very easy to record like 5 episodes and you're like, oh, I'm tired of this. Like it's I don't know, it's a lot of work. It's more work than I thought. I'm just gonna not do this anymore. And I'll just be honest, like it is very common, I think, to see that people get discouraged because a lot of it is like your mindset of like, I need to keep doing this because people need what I have to offer because of this why. And so the more you have that clear why and the more you continually remind yourself of it, and just like Alex said earlier, like encourage yourself, like cheer yourself on in it because the why is worth it. It just continues to sustain you in the podcast journey rather than run out of fuel because you were passionate or excited about it at first, but then you didn't really have the compelling reason to keep you going past the obstacles. And then the other one thing I would add, just to kind of like give somebody like a practical step, because I know there's a lot of like mindset stuff, is just like look up. I'm sure Dave has so many resources out there. There's also just the internet is a wealth of resources, right? Just look up any guide like how to start a podcast and then start with the very first step that you feel like you're at. Sometimes it's like, oh, not every step applies to you, you know. But just don't look at, oh my gosh, I have to do all these 20 steps. Just look at the first step and start there. Because I think for me, that was huge of like, oh my gosh, I don't even know how this is all going to happen. But when we broke it down into little steps and I was like, okay, I'm just going to take one step at a time. It made it so much more achievable and accessible and approachable. And combined with that, it also teaches you like patience with yourself. Because oftentimes we want like, oh, just snap my fingers, it's all done. But reality of anything in life, not just podcasting, it's a process that takes time, it takes discipline, it takes consistency, and it also takes patience with yourself and the process.
Great. I have a skill testing question for Alex here. I have a podcast called Dad Space. It's a podcast for dads by dads, because I'm a dad. And the idea of the podcast is to encourage men to be good partners to their spouses, to be good fathers, good community members, and to be good to themselves as men. So that's the idea of my Dad Space podcast. Alex, my question to you is, when we focus in on who our audience is and who we're speaking to, a lot of times the people I talk to, they're afraid of going too narrow because they want more people to be impacted than just who they're talking to. So they feel like they need to be wide and they don't want to narrow down or niche down too much because they want a big audience. So for my Dad Space podcast, I'm talking directly to men. Alex, what do you think my percentage of women listeners is for my Dad Space podcast? Any idea of a percentage?
I'm wondering if this is a trick question.
Could be. I could be leading the witness right now. Yes.
I want to say 0%, but I feel like there's also women who listen and send the podcast to their husbands. I'm going to say 20%. 65% of my audience are female for my Dad Space podcast.
Wow.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So let that sink in for a second. I know you like to internalize things. That's a big number. And when I look at those numbers, I'm thinking, should I change my message? And the conclusion I came to was, no, I'm not going to change my focus of talking to men. And even though I'm speaking to men and a majority of my audience are female, they're finding value there. So as much as I'm narrowing and niching down to speak to men, everyone's available to listen. I'm not going to shut the door on anyone. So as we fear niching down and excluding anybody, just realize that this podcast is open to anyone, right? As you guys do your show, you have a target audience, but that doesn't mean that you're keeping people away from your content and they're not allowed to participate. Mm-hmm. They're welcome as well. And that's what I love is that even though we niche down and narrow our focus, just understand and realize that you're reaching more people than you even anticipate.
Right.
And that you realize. And I love the fact that that's a possibility in podcasting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually feel like the more you niche down, the more listeners you get. It's kind of weird because, we learned of this phrase called spiky point of view, where like I said earlier, people are looking for opinions on things, and the more extreme you are, the more people just gravitate to it. So I feel like if you stand for something, then yeah, your niche will get it, but then it also just invites others as well. It's really weird. Like the narrower you are, almost the bigger your audience gets.
Right, because they feel seen and understood and known, or they know somebody who they know would feel be seen and understood. But like if you're not talking to anybody, then no one really resonates, and then they don't know anyone who would resonate either. So
Great. And then the whole idea about podcasting that I love, the big picture is that we can have impact on people's lives, people that will probably never meet, right?
Right.
And so right now, as we're doing this recording, I'm going to leave here with you two and then go back to my recordings for my podcast. But I'm doing a little micro series in my show called the Apple Seed Series. And right now I'm focusing on a quote that I read that says that you can count the number of seeds in an apple, but you can't count the number of apples in a seed.
Whoa, that's good.
Right. So as we create podcasts or we create episodes, we can count the number of listeners. We can see the percentage of male, female listeners in our podcast audience. What we can't count, what we can't measure is the impact of our words in our podcast.
Yeah.
Because as you two come on and share from your story and help people in your community, those people go home to their families and they set an example for their children. And their children have new parents and a new focus that helps them for them when they become parents. Exactly. And the words that you share in your podcast will outlive any statistic that shows up on your dashboard about who's listening to your show, because the words that you speak into that microphone as a couple have impact, and you can't measure that impact. So that's my encouragement to the two of you, is to keep going, keep creating this content that's helping people, and realize that you will never know in this current place that we're at right now how important your words really mean to the people listening and to those that are impacted by your words.
Yeah, that's so good.
Wow. Thanks for the encouragement. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. I feel like I totally agree. And I feel like I tell myself that, but it makes so much of a bigger difference when someone else says it, because it confirms like how I'm cheering myself on in terms of it's not about, being the biggest or in a numerical sense, the numbers, because it's about like doing it, believing that your impact is having so much more impact than you can even measure or see or perceive on this side of eternity. And I think for us also, like I remember in the very beginning, we were like dreaming big and we're like, oh, how amazing would it be to like reach even like, let's shoot for the stars or shoot for the moon. Let's go like 1 million people. And then at first I was like, that is just crazy. But I was thinking, it's actually not that crazy in terms of, even if you think about, if you reach like 100 people and then those 100 people reach 100 people and then you just continue multiplying, just like you said with the seed and the apples. It's like, even if you only saw the number 100, that could actually be 1 million without you even knowing it, like for generations down. And that just blows my mind, like when I think about that. So
yeah. I would say one last advice, and one thing I've learned is, because I'm a numbers guy, and I'm sure your analytical audience, for those who are analytical, would appreciate that. For me, when I started, I always looked at the numbers, like how many views, how many downloads, what devices are there, what's the trend, and you get discouraged when it doesn't meet your expectations or it's lower on a certain week. And I've learned not to look at that as much. I used to check it like almost every day, and now I check it like maybe twice a week, or not twice a week. That's not much better, but every other week. And so, it just keeps you going, and it helps you to not focus so much on the numbers. Although numbers do count, it should not be your main motivation.
Right. Yeah. We're not saying like disregard numbers at all. Like, it's insightful, right? What you observe, like what you said about your the women who are interested in listening to your dad podcast. That's interesting. That's like, okay, there's something here to be found. But yeah, definitely don't use it as a measuring stick for how you're doing. And as you were talking, I was thinking it's very similar to even what I've learned, what I feel like has totally changed for me in terms of health and fitness. I used to be like, when I go work out, I'm going to weigh myself afterwards. And if I didn't lose at least a pound, like something's not working. And then I would get so discouraged, like every day, like weighing myself. And it didn't like seem like it was a big difference. But it really changed for me when this year specifically, I started changing my mindset of like, I'm not doing this for the scale. I'm doing this because I know holistically being a healthier and like more fit person would benefit me in so many other ways, like energy wise, you know, how I can show up for my family, relationships, and even down the line. And so that changed my perspective, and it made me just look forward to the process rather than look forward to the results that I could measure on a scale. So.
Yeah, I think that whole numbers thing is great to kind of have a sense of where you're heading and how you're trending. But if you had 5 people listen to your podcast and those 5 people showed up in a room and waited for you to step up to the microphone as a couple, and the 2 of you walked in to a room full of 5 people and went, that's it? There's only 5 people here? Well, it's not really worth my time. How would you make them feel? They're there and they've been there every episode and they care about you and they find value in your content. What is your minimum number of lives touched that brings you back to the microphone? For me, to be quite honest, it was 1. If one person could be motivated to start a podcast because of listening to our conversation, I'm done.
Yeah.
I hit it. I obviously want the podcast to grow and do more, but what is my minimum number?
Right.
And that's one thing we really need to wrestle with as podcasters is we hear all these experts and all these people in big Facebook groups saying, I've got 100,000 downloads in 5 minutes. And you're like, well, I'm not even going to try because I can't match that.
Right.
But if one person's life is different because you two created a podcast episode and changed the way they think and brought light into their life, isn't that enough? Like that's got to be amazing just to know that happened. So
yeah,
I love it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's even more extreme, but I feel like even if it was 0, like being willing to still do it because it's on your heart, you're passionate about it, and you never know who might stumble upon it like next year, you know, or next decade even. And like there's so many people in history who were ignored for their lifetime, but after they died was when their work was found and people were like, this is amazing. So not that, you know, you should think, oh, no one's going to listen, but when I die, they'll be, you know, grateful for my podcast. But
dream big, but keep it with an open hand.
Yeah. But I think, personally, I was in the same boat. I was like, even if one person listens, it'll be worth it. But even if 0, like, I just know this is burning on my heart and I would regret never trying and never doing it. And so I'm just going to do it for my own sanity and peace.
Amazing. Okay, so before we go, guys, thank you for making time. We've taken a lot of your time today. I appreciate it. Talk about the podcast again, where we go to find you guys on social media. I'm on your website as well as we talk, but tell us about the show one more time and where do we go?
Yeah, you can find us at Let's Unpack That with Alex and Grace. That's our podcast. We release every Monday and we talk about all of the things about real life and how to live it fully, freely, and faithfully. And in terms of our social media and our website, it's With the Trans, Trans is our last name. So you can find us at With the Trans on Instagram, YouTube, and connect with us. We love talking about this stuff. So if anyone has questions about our journey or want us to expand more on anything, feel free to DM us. We're always happy to connect.
Awesome. Grace, thank you very much. Alex, as well, thank you for joining us, the 2 of you. It's great to have you both here. Congratulations on a great podcast. I love listening to it and be supporting and cheering you on here in Canada. So you got a Canadian listener. So I hope that counts. I hope you like that.
We're going global.
There you go. Awesome. Everyone go check out all the information in the show notes. And if you're thinking about creating a podcast with your partner and you're looking for some expert advice, Grace and Alex are here, and I'm sure they'd love an email or a question or comment. And we'd appreciate for you to listen to their show as well. Make sure you like, follow, share, subscribe, do all the things, and support a great couple with a great podcast. Thank you so much for being here, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.